हेलो फ्रेंड्स, केजी क्लासेस में आपका स्वागत है। आज हम आपको विलियम वर्ड्सवर्थ के लॉन्ग आंसर के बारे में बताएंगे। क्वेश्चन है, राइट ए नोट ऑन वर्ड्सवर्थ एज ए पोएट ऑफ नेचर। आंसर, फर्स्ट हेडिंग इंट्रोडक्शन। कैजामियन राइट्स अबाउट वर्ड्सवर्थ टू वर्ड्सवर्थ नेचर appear as a formative influence superior to any other, the educator of senses and mind alike, the sober in our hearts of the deep laden seeds of our feelings and beliefs. It speaks to the child in the fleeting emotions of early years and stirs the young poet to an ecstasy, the glow of which illuminates all his work and the rest of his life. Nature is a safe guide to wisdom and goodness. It is instinct with the irradiating presence of the divine. In his adoration of it, Wordsworth's creed is a mystical pantheism. This observation of Cajamian sums up the creed of Wordsworth as a poet of nature. That Wordsworth is a high priest of nature is an acknowledged fact. Wordsworth realized certain power in nature and a corresponding power in his own soul, as is revealed in the following lines to the prelude book first. For I methought while the sweet breath of heaven was blowing on my body, felt within a corresponding breeze that gently moved with quickening virtue. Line 33 to 36. Like others, Wordsworth's nature also included hills and mountains, rivers and springs, lakes and seas, earth and sky, winds, woods, trees, plants and flowers, the sun, the moon and stars. What his outlook is certainly different from the outlook of others. Poets like Pope looked at nature quite objectively, but Wordsworth's view of nature is colored by his hyper individualism. Next heading, nature as a living being. What distinguishes Wordsworth from other poets is his belief that nature is not merely a physical phenomenon but a living entity. To him, nature has not only life but feeling also. It is a living sentient being. Wordsworth goes even beyond that. Nature is endowed not only with life and feeling but also with will and purpose. He ascribes to it all the attributes of humanity: life, feeling, thinking and willing. He writes in lines written in early spring, and it is my faith that every flower enjoy the air it breathes. Next heading, stage in Wordsworth's conception of nature. Wordsworth's conception of nature was not the outcome of any momentary impulse or experience. It was the product of a slow process extending from childhood to manhood. The Prelude and Tintin trace the growth of the poet's conception of nature. On the basis of these poems, three stages are observed. Next heading is the first stage. In the first stage, nature served only a background to the poet's boys' sports, as Wordsworth himself says, what secondary to my own pursuits and animal activities and all their trivial pleasures. In his early days of boyhood, Wordsworth passed most of his time in childish joys, such as bathing in a stream, laying traps for birds, climbing trees for robbing the mother birds of their young ones from their nest, gathering May blossoms, hunting hare, boating and skating and the like. But during such coarser pleasures, Wordsworth was always conscious of some presence which is not to be put by. For example, when he indulged in laying snares for woodcocks, he felt some sort of sound trailing behind his guilty steps. I heard among the solitary hills low breathing coming after me and sounds of undistinguishable motion, steps almost as silent as the turf they trod. The prelude, first 332 to 322 to 325. The second stage of Wordsworth's love of nature is the stage of mere sensibility, devoid of thought. By this time he developed a liking for sensuous beauty of nature. At this stage Wordsworth was under the spell of his despotic senses, as is evident in the following lines of the prologue, Books 12. I roamed from hill to hill, from rock to rock, still craving combinations of new forms, new pleasure, wider empire for the sight, proud of her own endowment and rejoiced to lay the inner faculties asleep. Lines 143 to 147. In this stage Wordsworth viewed nature with a purely physical passion. The picturesque beauty of nature became an object of passions of the poet, as he writes in Tintin Abbey. The sounding cataract haunted me like a passion. The tall rock, the mountain, and the deep and gloomy wood, their colours and their forms were then to me an appetite, a feeling, and a love that had no need of a remoter charm, unborrowed from the eye. Lines 76 to 83. Heading है the third stage. The third stage of Wordsworth's love of nature is marked with a communion with nature. It is the stage when the poet sees nature by the eye of soul and not by the physical eye. At this stage, Wordsworth passes through spiritual experiences of nature. The youthful jollity turns into a blessed mood in which the word thin of the mystery, in which the heavy and the very weight of all these unintelligible worlds is lightened. In fact, the third stage of Wordsworth's conception of nature was the result of the poet's mood of despair and gloom caused by his interest in politics, which gave him a shock at the sight of the suffering humanity. Thus, in the third stage of his love of nature, Wordsworth attained a wise passiveness in which all the senses are suspended and the disturbing influence of the reason is removed. He wrote in the Prelude, Book 6, the light of sense goes out, but with a flash that has revealed the invisible world. Line 600 to 602. Heading है Nature as a Teacher. Wordsworth wrote in his beautiful poem, The Tables Timed, on impulse from a vernal wood may teach you more of man, of moral evil and of good than all the sages can. These lines clearly suggest what Wordsworth thought of nature. Wordsworth regarded nature as his best teacher. The prelude is an account of the best part of the poet's education that he received from nature. He was always grateful to nature for the means which she deigned to employ for the poet's intellectual and spiritual refinement. Nature exercised upon the poet the discipline of fear and joy. This discipline enabled the poet to feel nature's presence in the background of all his activities. Last adding a conclusion. Wordsworth is often criticized on this ground that he has commanded books. In fact, in advising to abandoned books, the poet simply emphasizes the need of not ignoring the direct inspiration that a man can get from nature. In this regard, Graham Hughes has aptly remarked, beneath a half playful and even superficial opposition to science and philosophizing, there is the wholly serious demand central to Wordsworth's faith for a total response by man's nature to the non-human native around him. Those who are worried by Wordsworth's habit of finding sermons in stones are free to give up that side of his work, but they would also be wise to remember the remark of a later poet. It's extremely unlike Wordsworth that in the poet's church there in an altar but no pulpit, and that morals drawn from the ledger Calendine are not the core of Wordsworth's beliefs. Next question, write a note on Wordsworth as a mystic poet. Answer, heading है introduction. Wordsworth is unambiguously acknowledged as a mystic. Mysticism involves the perception of a divine unity behind the ordinary physical world. The mystic sees a divine unfailing life in all lives and considers all things in the visual world as manifestation of the one divine life. In the words of Spurgeon, Wordsworth was not only poet, he was also a seer and a mystic and a practical psychologist with an amazingly subtle mind and an unusual capacity for feeling. It was not the beauty of nature which brought him joy and peace, but the life in nature. He himself had caught a vision of that life. He knew it and felt it, and it transformed the whole of the existence for him. Wordsworth's mysticism is deeply rooted in his conception of nature. For him, nature has life and joy in herself. She is a manifestation of an active principle which has its noblest seat in the mind of man. His senses through which he communicates with nature feed his soul, being the chief inlets of soul in this age. That is why Wordsworth can say without hyperbole that nature is the guardian of his heart and soul of all his moral beings. Wordsworth's mystic creed is clearly discernible in the following lines. I seemed to learn that what we see of forms and images which floats along our mind and what we feel of active or recognizable thought. Prospectiveness or intellect or will not only is not worthy to be deemed our being to be prized as what we are, but is the very littleness of life. Such consciousness I deem but accident, released from the one interior life that lives in all things, sacred from the touch of that far secondary power by which in weakness we create distinction, when then believe that all our puny boundaries are things which we perceive and not which we have made, in which all beings live with God, themselves are God, existing in the mighty whole, and indistinguishable as the cloudless east at noon is from the cloudless west, when all the hemisphere is one cerulean blue. Wordsworth's whole being is an awareness of God, a union or communion in which all thoughts expires in blessedness and love. In the Tentative, Wordsworth calls this state of the soul as the state of the blessed mood, in which the Worthen of the mystery in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened that serene and blessed mood until the breath of this corporeal frame and even the motion of our human blood almost suspended. We are led asleep in body and become a living soul, while with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. It is in this blessed mood the poet holds communion with nature. In this regard, as a brook's birds are quite wordy between the spirits in nature and the mind of man, there is a prearranged harmony, and it is this harmony which enables nature to communicate its own thoughts to man and to effect upon them until a union between them is established. In this communion, which is very much like an Indian sage's samadhi, the poet derives beatitude or anand. He feels a presence which is common to man and nature. The two words the God in man and in nature is one. This idea is expressed in the following lines of Tintin Abbey. I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting sun and the round ocean and the living air and the blue sky, and in the mind of man a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. In the prelude, Wordsworth calls this motion and a spirit as wisdom and spirit of the universe, the soul that is the eternity of thoughts and givest to forms and images a breath, an everlasting motion. The famous immortality ode also gives utterance to Wordsworth's mystic ideas. To the poet, the supersensuous world appeared to be more real than the world of sense perception. This idea is expressed in the following lines of the ode. Those obstinate questions of sense and outward things falling from us, vanishing blank misgivings of a creature moving about in worlds not realized. Last studying conclusion. In his conception of the existence of the soul and its relation to the divine soul, also Wordsworth shows himself as a mystic. With Plato, Wordsworth believed in the eternity of soul. In this regard, J.C. Smith has aptly observed, the soul that can see the divine in nature must itself be divine. It belongs to a world beyond the infinite world of sense, and its true life is a ceaseless pressing on towards that infinite life which its essence and its end. Thus Wordsworth freed himself from that external and mechanical conception of the relation of God to man and nature which had prevailed throughout the 18th century. The soul, he tells us, comes from afar, and the light of its heavenly home lingers on in its innocent childhood. But the embodied soul must assume its earthly burden and take its place in the world of man, and as the auroral light of its home dies away, must learn to live by duty, not by instinct, but through the heavenly light has gone the memory of it remains to remind the soul of its divine origin and destiny. Next question, write a note on Wordsworth as a poet of child. Heading a answer introduction. Wordsworth had a high conception of childhood. His view of the child is apparent in his most popular lines. Child is the father of the man. In fact, Wordsworth has his own individual way of looking at childhood. He was never interested in the playfulness or beauty of childhood. On the other hand, he reads mysterious revelations in the child's innocence, its fancies are brought from afar. It is the father of the man, the seer haunted forever by the eternal mind, immortality, odd. The root of this feeling was Wordsworth's memory of his own childhood, so ordinary in its incidents, so marvelous in its emotions. He regarded his mature imagination as faintly following out the traces of these boyish vision. The child life is the hiding place of man's power, where man must seek it with all his mature faculty. Wordsworth's love of the child is particularly seen in these poems. BR7, There Was a Boy, The Idiot Boy, The Immortality Ode, The Prelude, Book First and Book Second, Lucy Gray, The Cuckoo and Alice Fell. It was not Wordsworth alone who idealized childhood. The mystics and philosophers in all ages have ever made childhood recollection the basis of their philosophical questionings. Wordsworth also speaks of his childhood recollections with a sense of gratitude for those first affections, those shadowy recollections which, be they what they may, are yet the fountain light of all our day, are yet a master light of our seeing. Intimations of immortality, line 149 to 153. When Wordsworth returned from France as a disillusioned person, the recollection of his childhood worked as a healing balm to his spiritually wounded soul. In the Prelude, Book First, he recollects his childhood and says, "Even then I felt gleams like the flashing of a shield. The earth, a common face of nature, speak to me rememberable things sometimes. 'Tis true, by chance collisions and quaint accidents like those ill-sorted unions, works supposed of evil-minded fairies, yet not vain, not profitless, if happily they impressed collateral objects and appearances, albeit lifeless then and doomed to sleep, until maturer seasons called them forth to impregnate and to elevate the mind." The following lines of the Prelude, Book Second, highlight Wordsworth's faith in the child's creative faculty and imagination. "Blessed the infant babe, for with my best conjecture I would trace our being's earthly progress. Blessed the babe nursed in his mother's arms, who sinks to sleep rocked on his mother's breast, who with his soul drinks in the feelings of his mother's eyes. For him in one dear presence there exists in virtue a virtue which irradiates and exalts objects through widest intercourse of sense. No outcast he bewildered and depressed, along his infant veins are interfused the gravitation and the filial bond of nature that connect him with the world. Is there a flower to which he points with hand to be together it already love drawn from love's purest earthly fount for him hath beautified that flower already shaded of pity cast from inward tenderness do fall around him upon aught that wears unsightly marks of violence or harm. Emphatically such a being lives, frail creature as he is, helpless as frail, an inmate of this active universe, for feeling has to him imparted power, that through the growing faculties of sense doth like an agent of the one great mind creator and receiver both, working but in alliance with the works which it beholds. Such verily is the first poetic spirit of our human life, by uniform control of after years in most abated or surprised in some, through every change of growth and of decay preeminent till death. But Wordsworth's philosophic attitude towards the child is best expressed in his poem Ode on Intimation of Immortality. According to Riley, it was not by an acquaintance with Platonic philosophy that he arrived at his glorification of childhood, but by looking at nature and life with an open mind. Childhood is the most glorious time of life, therefore Wordsworth calls the child mighty prophet, seer blessed, on whom those truths do rest which we are toiling all our lives to find. Last heading conclusion. Wordsworth believes that the child is endowed with vivid recollection of the previous life, hence its mind is not utterly devoid of the past glory, not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. Wordsworth calls the child as father of the man, because so long as the child remains in the state of innocence, it enjoys celestial vision. As it grows to be a man, these visions fade away and the grown-up man is engrossed too much with world. Hence Wordsworth consider the child as the best philosopher, who yet dost keep thy heritage, thou eye among the blind, that deep and silent readest the eternal deep, haunted for ever by the eternal mind. Thus it may be seen that Wordsworth sees the image of God in the child brought up in natural surrounding. Next question है, write a note on Wordsworth as a teacher. Answer. Wordsworth the poet always wished himself to be considered as a teacher. He wrote to his friend Sir George Beaumont, every great poet is a teacher. I wish to be considered as a teacher or as nothing. There is scarcely one of my poems which does not aim to direct the attention to some moral sentiments or to some general principle or law of thoughts or of our intellectual constitution. This view clearly shows that Wordsworth wrote poetry with a definite purpose. He made his purpose more clear to Lady Beaumont, to console the afflicted, to add sunshine to daylight by making the happy happier, to teach the young and the gracious of every age to see, to think, and to feel, and therefore to become more actively and securely virtuous. Accordingly, critics have found the poetry of Wordsworth as a great nourisher and stimulant. Peter as the very culture of feeling, Stuart Mill and as moral and didactic. The didactic note in Wordsworth's poetry is the most apparent in his nature poetry. Wordsworth considered nature the best teacher. This idea is best expressed in the following lines of the tables turned. One impulse from the vernal wood may teach you more of man, of moral evil and of good than all the sages can. It was Wordsworth's faith that nature teaches wisdom, truth and reality of things. One moment of communion with nature may give us more of wisdom than many tears of reason can give. One moment now may give us more than 50 years of reason. According to Wordsworth, reason is discursive. It is powerless to attain truth. False secondary power by which we multiply distinctions, then deem that our puny boundaries are things that we perceive and not that we have made. The prelude, second, lines 216 to 219. Nature manifests itself as a beautiful unity. Reason fails to grasp this unity. Wordsworth speaks of nature lore. Sweet is the lore which nature brings. Our meddling intellect misshapes the beauteous form of things we murder to dissect. The tables turned, line 25 to 28. At another place, Wordsworth refers to nature as the anchor of my purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my heart and soul, of all my moral being. But sermons in stones and tongues in running brooks cannot be found by all and sundry. One can experience these through a communion with nature. This communion brings that blessed mood in which the burden of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened, that serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on until the breath of this corporeal frame and even the emotion of our human blood almost suspended, we are led asleep in body and become a living soul, while with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things turned away. Wordsworth's moral bent is seen in a number of poems. His strong moral and philosophical convictions, which he professed to teach, are embodied in poems like Intimations of Immortality and Ode to Duty. In Intimations of Immortality, the poet bore work upon the conviction child is the father of man, child who comes with clouds of heavenly glory, gradually forgets his prenatal experiences as it grows up. The grown up man can realize by recalling his childhood experiences that the soul is immortal. The whole poem is reflective and meditative, teaching such profound ideas about nature as the following. To me, the meanest flower that blows can give thoughts that do often lie too deep for tears. Apparently, the poem carries a certain ethical purpose where the poet talks about the soothing thoughts that spring out of human suffering. His Ode to Duty is a message about the importance of duty in life, the secret of real happiness both within and without lies in the performance of one's duty. Duty is the source of wisdom, humanity, and spirit of self-sacrifice. Wordsworth calls duty a stern lawgiver, the stern daughter of the voice of God. If we obey her command, serene will be our days, and bright and happy will our nature be. When love is an unearning light, and joy its own security, and they a blissful course may hold. Even now, who not unwisely bold, live in the spirit of this creed, yet seek thy firm support according to their need. Last and conclusion. His other poems, such as Resolution and Independence, The Old Cumberland Beggar, Michael etc., are also imbued with one moral or the other. In fact, Wordsworth's didactic utterances are scattered all through his poetry. Wordsworth had deep insight into human life. Naturally, his poetry reflects what the poet felt about life, about human life, about the peace and consolation that nature brings to the suffering mankind. Nature has been presented as a healing power, calming and influencing our soul. This is the crux of Wordsworth's teaching as a poet. Wordsworth's poetry is sometimes criticized as being too much dull and deductive, but such criticism is the result of a lack of insight into his great poetry. In the opinion of a critic, we turn to other poets for amusement, for intellectual stimulus, for the culture of emotions. We turn to Wordsworth for moral and spiritual consolation. His poetry offers spiritual food for mankind. In the words of Ligius, the lyrical ballads and the poem of the same group are a series of moral analysis of rich intrinsic value, discreetly guided by edifying and utilitarian purpose. Thanks, best of luck.